Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'd, as was requested by my Habib, to talk about a little bit about my story about accepting Islam. And I was given a list of questions, and we'll try to answer them and give them as much right as possible. First question: what is your name, nationality, and background? My name is Khalid Green. The name I was born with, my mother gave me, is Craig Green. I'm from Seattle, Washington. That's where I was born. I'm African American, and of course that means I'm from the United States. I grew up in a place called, predominantly after leaving Seattle, in the suburbs, in a place called Bellevue, Washington, for those familiar with Washington State. The second question: when did you first accept Islam, and what was the reason for your conversion? Well, for me, it was a process, and it was really through academics. So for me, initially, I accepted Islam, I think it was around 1993. At this time, prior to that, I was really soul searching for who I am as a person. And I initially began with looking into the Nation of Islam, mainly because of the influence of Malcolm X and how that book, reading his autobiography, changed my life and changed my outlook on many things, and even who I was as a black man in America, among other things. And so I loved his integrity, and that attracted me immensely, and his discipline. So I began going to meetings of the Nation of Islam, but I didn't find what I was looking for there. And the racism that was there. So there's a difference between nationalism and, being proud of your race and things like this. But what I saw there was the racism, meaning that to preach black superiority, that never sat with me. I couldn't agree with any superiority, whether it was white over black or black over white, and that necessitated in their Aqidah hatred. Also, a lot of the stories of their Aqidah. So it just didn't sit with me. I wasn't getting the spiritual juice I was searching for. And at that time, I was a musician. And in fact, not a musician, I was a singer and a rapper and a screamer in many different groups. And the group that I was in at the time, I was seeking. So I was used to a greater or lesser extent, being the front man in the group and being in front of the public. Not that I was very comfortable with that, but I was used to it. I'd had many experiences in being and performing in venues and doing some mild traveling around Washington State and as far as Portland, Oregon, to do shows and so on and so forth. So I had a song at that time called Soul Searching, and basically the lyrics, of course I wrote all my own lyrics, was, I'm soul searching to find myself, something changed my mind, and something anyhow. So I was on a mission. I was actually going through a process of soul searching, who I am, what should I be doing, what's the purpose of life. And I wasn't an unhappy person. I was into self-help, and I was looking at all the various religious traditions. I was reading, going back to the Bible, because I was raised in the church. I was looking at Buddhism, and I was even Hinduism. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita and things like this, finding a little spirituality in each of these traditions, but only Islam, when I got the Quran, the translation, was the only thing that seemed practical. Some of those other faiths seemed like going up in the mountain and wishing world peace, and world peace would come about. But Islam was practical, especially with the Salat. So I had a friend who I grew up with and was in the first rap group, I guess if you want to call it that, back in the days of breakdancing, that we used to be in a group together. And he had actually moved to Canada, and he come back, and his girlfriend was a Ismaili, Aga Khani or something like this. And so he told me, he said, buy the Quran and put it in your car for good luck. Well, for me, I didn't want the good luck. I just wanted to read it, actually. So I bought it and I read it. And I read it through, and I was trying to make salat. I remember going to visit him, and I was already trying to implement some of the positive aspects of discipline. I was trying to, of course, I was deep into music and loved hip hop and loved all these and jazz and everything, and punk rock and hardcore and pretty much all kind of music. And so I was on this path anyhow. And I found that Islam, in the exalting of Tawheed and the practicality of prayer, that this, had something for me. Also, while being in the university, I also found that, I had courses about, I took courses about Africa, as a continent and the various nations and colonialism in Africa, but also how the Muslims impacted many nations in Africa. And also I took a class on the history of China and another course on the history of India. And so I was also, exposed to how the Muslims, the Mughal Empire, and different things that really fascinated me. And I was going through this whole process all at one time. And then to make it as short as possible, I became Muslim eventually in the masjid and so forth. So the reason for my conversion was the love of Tawheed, because I was soul searching, and and the practicality of prayer. When did you think it was important to seek Islamic knowledge of your newly adopted religion? That was a long time into my Islam before I even thought about seeking knowledge, because where I grew up in Seattle, we didn't, at that time there wasn't a large immigrant community. The Somalis were beginning to come when I was a Muslim. So we had other masajid, we had some Arab communities and Pakistani and Indian communities as well that were already kind of established. But the community of the greater Seattle area or Washington State was still kind of small, though we had several masajid. And then we had a large Cambodian community as well, Cham Masjid, and that's where I took my Shahada. And so we didn't have anyone to really teach us. Some of the people who went out from our community to go and seek knowledge, a brother Abdul Bari, who was well known in his dawah efforts with the Maghribi Institute, and also Sheikh Farid and some others. We have a lot of Tulab al-Ilm in the Seattle area who, from that same generation more or less, who went out to seek knowledge. For me, it took a long time before I had an interest in knowledge. The first books that we read were Sayyid Qutb, and also a book by Jamil Alameen, because our community that I function with, most of the people had bay'ah to Jamil Alameen. I did not, but they had bay'ah, and there are many war stories out of that, but that's outside of our scope. And so I didn't begin to think it was important to seek knowledge until I got the chance to maybe do my master's degree. I finished my bachelor's more or less, and I went to visit a good brother of mine who traveled to the East Coast, and he went to New Jersey to the community of Abu Muslima. And that was the first time of me seeing really a student of knowledge and someone, we were just so, the people were at awe at the things he was doing, and I was just so surprised coming from Seattle, Washington, all these, especially to see indigenous Muslims, African Americans, big beards, short thobes, niqabs. I was just amazed by the outer appearance, and that began to incite or instill in me a need to learn more about my deen and to become more serious about my deen. And a lot of interesting stories out of that. But however, I recall some of the brothers were going to go to Yemen, and at that time I was trying to get a visa to Sudan, and my passport at that time, I had dreadlocks. My dreadlocks used to be on my shoulders, and that was something I used to be very proud of. And so my first few years in Islam, I had dreads on my shoulders. And no one could tell me to cut those dreads. But then eventually, as I matured in my Islam, I one day, cut my dreads off. And I recall that, the experience with Abu Muslim's community, that instilled with me the want and the desire to go abroad and seek knowledge and to go to Yemen as other people were going to Yemen. What motivated? So my first experience in seeking knowledge was actually once I got my ticket. I got a one-way ticket, and I didn't know anybody really, and I had some directions. I could read and write a little bit of Arabic. I learned that in my community from a Palestinian brother. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him. And also a brother, Abdul Nasser from Sudan, taught me to read Quran as well. And others that helped me to instill a foundation. And so from that, I just got up and I went to Yemen. And I happened to run into some British brothers. And at that time, I ran into Hassan Somali soon thereafter. And he was good friends with who later became a good friend of mine, Ali Clark Al-Comptoni, rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatin wasiya. So I ran into those guys, and they were telling me to go to Damaj, and I had already had instructions to go to Damaj, and I had to meet up with some brothers, Abdullah McPhee, some other brothers who later stayed in Damaj, mashallah, many years. So I went to Damaj, and that's when I began to learn more about Islam and learn more of the Arabic language. But I didn't stay very long. So that's when I first started seeking knowledge. Then I ended up actually having a lot of time away. I had to go back to America. I ran out of money, went to the UAE for a little bit, and I ran out of money, got married, went back to the States, and then it was the reality of being out of the system and not having money and not studying enough to be able to really go to books, not having enough Arabic, and that's one thing why I try to stress the importance of inqita, of continuing seeking knowledge and not taking a break, especially when it comes to sciences like learning the Arabic language. The next question, do you remember what were the first books you started studying when you started seeking Islamic knowledge? Well, those were the Medina books in Arabic, and also I believe some of the books, Usul al-Thalatha, I believe, and Arba'in an-Nawawi. Those were some of the first books that I began to kind of study a bit and study with some students of knowledge. Were these books important in developing your knowledge of Islam? Yes, very important. Very important because of the emphasis on Aqidah. Then I went back to Yemen. I kept going back and forth, and I would study more grammar, studied in Aden for a while, and that's when I actually probably had enough Arabic. I, had a student of knowledge, one of the local imams there, Anwar al-Adros, Hafidhullah Ta'ala. I hope he's okay with all the fitna that's went and taken place in Yemen, and those beloved brothers in Yemen. And I could just tell you so many countless stories of the beauty that I found in Yemen. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Iman Yemani wa hikmah Yemeniya. Iman is, faith is Yemeni, and wisdom is Yemeni. And so anyhow, those were some of the first books, and he took the time. Also, my beloved brother Adil Ubadi, and I hope that he's okay. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him. Also, he used to sit with me, and that was the first fiqh book. I began to actually go with him. He sat, gave me a personal dars. We'd sit and we'd read, and he would explain to me and break down for me Imam Shawkani's book, Roda Nadia, or I forget the name of the book. And so we would, that was my first real exposure to really any fiqh, and I was loving it. And he, sat with me. And so those books really had a great impact on me. But really taking my talib al-ilm to another level was coming to Saudi. Firstly, I went to Saudi. My Arabic was better, but it still wasn't strong enough to where I could understand 100% of what was being taught. But my Sheikh Saeed bin Halil, that helped me. The Sheikh, let me be the reader for Sharh Sunnah by Imam Barbahari with the Saudis and others, and that put pressure on me, and it helped me to improve my reading, and it helped me to improve my understanding. And the Sheikh was just all about durus, there was just constant durus, even though he was reading books way over my head, and I would be in those durus. Sunan Tirmidhi we're studying Barbahari, I was, reading for, he had other things in fiqh, Bulugh al-Maram we were studying, book of Fara'id, and that was really hard, for me in Bulugh al-Maram. But all those books helped to shape me. Also, then at night he would read from I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, which is a major book in Usul al-Fiqh and other sciences. I don't know how to describe that book of Ibn al-Qayyim. I would just try to pick up what I could, and that all helped to shape me. Then I would say I was learning, I was getting stronger, and we were going through books, and it was fantastic. Then I went to Medina. My workplace changed. I went to Medina, and it just went to a whole nother level. And the amount of durus to be able to sit with all of those scholars, and also do some formal Arabic programs too to clean up my Arabic more. And so the next question is, have you learned Islamic knowledge from religious scholars? Yes. And so that goes back to, also in Hayl, there was Sheikh Aida Shemri and Sheikh Abdullah Ubaylan. But when I got to Medina, there were so many mashayikh, and I sat quite a bit with Sheikh, with Sheikh Abdul Muhsin, Imam Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad. I used to sit with Sheikh Saleh al-Aboud for tafsir after Fajr sometimes. I sat with a little bit Sheikh Ali Nasser al-Faqih, a little bit Sheikh Saleh Suhaimi, a lot of Dawrat with the Sheikh. Sheikh Ibrahim Raheli was pretty much a daily part of my diet, and doing books with him, and Sheikh Suleiman Raheli as much as he taught. And he also lived very close to where I live, so then I could corner him and get questions in. Sheikh Ubaid Jabri, I used to go sit and do some books with him. Sheikh, and then many mashayikh during the Dawrat. It would be Sheikh Muhammad bin Hadi, it would be Sheikh, just so many mashayikh. Sheikh Abdullah Bukhari a little bit, Sheikh Muhammad bin Hadi a little bit. I would sometimes try to catch durus with him. Some of the other scholars that I spent significant time, those are probably Sheikh Muhammad Aqil. I would, sometimes if I had questions, I would just go visit him, pray in his masjid, try to catch him, maybe go to his house. Sheikh, and then some other mashayikh, Sheikh Ahmed, Wallah Mistan. Yeah, many different mashayikh, Sheikh Abdul Razak as well, of course, mainly in Dawrat. And so that was a lot of experience with some of the scholars. Which field of the Islamic sciences should a speaker of knowledge start with, and why? Many questions and I'm missing them. Let's go back. Were these books important in developing your knowledge? What was the first Islamic science you studied? Fiqh, Aqidah, Tafsir. I would say I spent most of the time emphasizing books in Aqidah, because that was kind of what was put before me. And that's what, we thought was most important. It is most important, of course, getting your Aqidah. But I do kind of wish I would have been much more grounded and well-rounded. And that's why studying programs, and that Allah favored me to do Dawrat there in Medina, but also in Jeddah. Those things, I graduated from the Institute of Studying the Quran and Sunnah in Jeddah, which was a 2-year Sharia program. That immensely helped my talib al-ilm, really take it to another level. As well as I went back and forth. I went back to Yemen again, went to Dar al-Hadith in Hadramaut, sat with Sheikh Abdullah Mar'i, immensely benefited from the Sheikh. and other mashayikh in Yemen. And, and then I came back to Medina and, continued studying. So books of Aqidah was first and foremost. Sorry to ramble. Try to be a little more on point. As far as the first Islamic science, so I said Aqidah, those other programs and sitting in other durus with Sheikh Suleiman Ar-Hayli, we got more fiqh. That was his thing. And Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abad, hadith, and others. I also, towards the end, I would try to sit with Sheikh, and also while I was in Jeddah, Imam, who's one of the Kibar Ulama in the committee of Kibar Ulama, is Sheikh Sheikh Mukhtar Shanqiti, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, and others. Did this lay a solid foundation for further study in Islam? Yes, it did, absolutely. Which field of Islamic science should a seeker of knowledge start with, and why? I believe they should start with Aqidah, with creed, and also the basic fiqh that can help them practice their religion. And that's why, because the Aqidah is the key to paradise, knowing Tawheed and being grounded in the science of Tawheed, and learning the fiqh of ibadat, fiqh of worship, things like tahara and salat, and zakat for the one who has wealth, and hajj for the one who's able to make hajj, and som, fasting, and so forth. Those are very important to have us, to be solid and be exposed to that knowledge. Have you learned Islamic knowledge from religious scholars? We mentioned that. What benefits did you gain from learning Islamic knowledge from the religious scholars? Just to be brief, I would say by being in person with the scholars compared to listening to tapes, you learn the tarbiyah. You learn, for example, one of the most powerful things that I remember about Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al-Abad. I remember once he was asked a question, and I think it was during Sunan Tirmidhi, and it was a question about breaking your wudu. I think maybe about the luhum al-ibil. Does a camel's eating camel meat break your wudu? I think it was that, or maybe it was mesa dhakr, or rubbing your private parts. Anyway, and I thought that I knew because from my studies. I was like, yeah, this. And the Sheikh hesitated, and then he said, Wallahu alam. To hear an alim Rabbani who knows, to say, and Allah knows best, that's humbling, and that shows you the tawada, and it shows fiqh fi deen, it shows understanding of the religion, and hikmah and wisdom, to give the students that tarbiyah, that you don't have to answer every question, and if there's some doubt or whatever, that should be a tarbiyah for a student of knowledge. And a da'i, that they shouldn't have, be quick to rush to answer every question, that they should ponder, reflect, that they should study. Also, you see that from a lot of the scholars. One thing, that's when I learned a lot of tarbiyah from Sheikh Ibrahim Ar-Hayli and Sheikh Suleiman Ar-Hayli, and they have different styles. And Sheikh Ubaid Jabri and others. They all have different styles. And one thing I like about Sheikh Ibrahim Ar-Hayli, and that I learned from him, is like when he would get questions, and sometimes people, they would misunderstand, and it would come out in their questions, and he would, the way he would reflect before he would answer sometimes. It's like a computer. So it's like he'd process. He wouldn't always just jump, but he's much more reserved. He might stop, and you see him looking up, and then he'll start answering. Boom, he comes, kitab wa sunnah, and starts giving it to you. And Sheikh Suleiman Ar-Hayli is like a amazing computer, and so you see that he just leaves no stone untouched. It's just you see amazing things. And I failed to mention Imam Muqbil bin Hadi al-Wadi, and at that time I didn't really know Arabic, and that was the beginning of my talab al-ilm, and that was an incredibly high-powered impact I'll never forget in my life. Meeting that Imam and watching him, and seeing and the immense love for the book and the sunnah. And still, even today, people joke, always, my colleagues at work and others, because I say wallahu musta'an all the time. I got that from Imam Muqbil, from his tarbiyah, that he had a sense of humor. He was amazing, and he was just an amazing lover and propagator of the Quran and the Sunnah, and that tarbiyah of really going to the nusus, abandoning hizbiyah, abandoning partisanship, and that no, it's not about me, it's not about a group or a sect or even your scholar, but it's about going back to the book and the Sunnah. And so you saw that rawness. I just never see, and even I would say I saw that with Yahya al-Hujuri in those early days, because he used to teach more when I was in Damaj than Sheikh Muqbil. And you saw humility, and you saw a love for the Sunnah, that they were just so serious because they didn't have all the trappings that you saw in Saudi Arabia. Just humble thobes, imamas, and they were just amazing. So that was an amazing type of educative effect, and of going to the evidences, going to the evidences. And this is been instilled in me, even though I may have very limited knowledge and so much shortcomings in practice. Those are some of the gains that I gained from the religious scholars. Could you name first 3 scholars? We just did that, and develop your understanding of Islamic knowledge. In your opinion, which is more beneficial, studying by books or through religious scholars? They're both very important, but of course studying by scholars is much more important. That, the Salaf used to say that whoever's book is his sheikh, then he is misguided. And I remember Sheikh Abu Salah al-Afghani, also he influenced me immensely in Sardiya, in Medina as well, visiting him. And he used to mention that athar quite a bit, and that the importance of scholars you can't equate. And you can see this from students or people who are da'is in the West, for example, or in other places, even amongst the Arab world, who didn't have that silsila. They didn't study with scholars necessarily. Maybe they studied just degrees and they studied just from their books. You see that they make more mistakes and sometimes more errors in judgment than the one who has the tarbiyah of the ulama. It's different. It's just different, and I could go on and on and on and articulate for that to you in many instances. And even there's certain scholars that the people put up in certain countries, and I don't want to mention names, but I know a particular scholar who refutes many people, and he has knowledge. I have many of his books. Any of his books I can get, I have his books, and I enjoy his knowledge and taking from him. But you see, he doesn't have that silsila. He doesn't. If you look at his background, he studied, and graduated from universities. His background is not even Islamic sciences necessarily, and he hasn't studied with ulama, even though he's Salafi. He's Salafi and he's respectable. But you see, because of that, I see shortcomings, and you can see this in some of his judgments and the way he talks about other individuals. And so my point being is that tarbiyah of the scholars and that connection with ulama, like my scholars that I mentioned, they all have connection to major scholars in this time. These are all students of great imams in that are well known, like Bin Baz and Al-Albani and Bin Uthaymeen and others. Alhamdulillah, I've had a chance to, at least attend some lectures of Sheikh Rabi' bin Hadi al-Madkhali in Mecca when he lived in Mecca. Just a few visits. And when he came to Medina, so I can't say that I had a lot of experience with him as personally as far as tarbiyah and so forth, but he's a well-known Salafi scholar. Why are they important? Why do I think they're important for a student of knowledge? Again, I said for that tarbiyah, for that educative effect, for the humbling. They teach you to be humble when there are righteous scholars. And one thing I will say, there's also a difference that I've seen with the level of knowledge. When you see major scholars, like some of the scholars, mashallah, they have knowledge, but they have different levels. When I have never really attended more than lectures with Imam Fawzan, but I've met him personally on a couple occasions when he came to visit us in Hail at our university and otherwise. And you see a different effect also with Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad. These imams and Imam Muqbil and others, the kind of tarbiyah and the kind of effect that these imams do, you don't see that they get excited very easy. They deal with things a lot of times really just with knowledge, whereas you sometimes see younger scholars, they get, excited more, and they might, name call some of them, may Allah bless us in them. They may, they just have a different way because of the kind of tarbiyah that you see those elders and those major scholars, the way they answer questions and stuff, it's with strength. Like if you listen to Fawzan, his Arabic is easy to understand. He speaks for the general audience, and he teaches so even lay persons that know Arabic can sit in his durus. It's not always way out there for higher level for students of knowledge and stuff, but he teaches for everyone. And also you see, because of his level of knowledge, he's just like it's like a power punch. It's just really the kind of the level of knowledge and the way they deal with questions. It's just different, and it's difficult for me to articulate and put it into language. So, same way with Imam Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad and Muhammad Mukhtar al-Shanqiti. These, he's also like an ocean when you ask those kind of imams, so they really inspire you to practice, and they inspire you to be humble, and they inspire you not to get caught up in controversies, where you find some younger scholars, and even some that are older in age, they have controversy around them all the time, and they're, and they sometimes speak quicker, and sometimes they make more mistakes, whereas you don't see that with a lot of the kibar or ulama, those major scholars. And so that's very important to sit with them and benefit from them, and they offer many lessons. As far as the question, have you learned the Arabic language? I still need to learn Arabic language. I still need to advance my Arabic, but I've studied books in grammar, and I've forgotten so much, but I still try to read, and I teach on the YouTube and stuff, and this keeps me active in the books by teaching. And so that's very important, to teach what you know. Do you think learning the Arabic language is important for a student of Islamic knowledge? I absolutely think it's necessary for someone to go to another level and to really be a teacher. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who doesn't know Arabic, because there's so much that's translated into English that people can teach many sciences and learn many sciences fairly well. But with the Arabic language, you're going to take things to a whole nother level, and you're going to have access to things you will never have in English. And somebody mentioned about why don't they translate those major books like completely Majmu'ah Fatawa and stuff. It wouldn't be, because even in the Arabic language, you need a certain high level of Arabic. You need a high level of knowing and understanding the mustalahat, the terminologies that are used. So Arabic is very important. Going back to your question, it's very, very important. Not all books that you can just go to. I have some books that are just references. I use them just as references, but it's not like I could read Majmu'ah Fatawa, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and I would start issuing verdicts and stuff. You don't see the scholars teaching that, except for to their special students. They might teach, you might have special durus behind closed doors teaching bits and pieces. You'll see the scholars teaching bits and pieces, but those books, there are certain books that are just references, and they're references for scholars. They're not for everyone to go into. So again, the Arabic language is a very important tool to really take it to another level, and to be, if someone's going to be a serious student of knowledge, they need it, and no matter what their cultural background. Is there anything else you would like to add? So much to say, but I think I've said so much and too much, and I know this is going to be difficult for you to transcribe. May Allah make it easy for you. May Allah bless us and you. May Allah bless us with ikhlas, with thabat, and forgive us of our many sins. A last point I probably want to make is the importance of, for someone seeking knowledge, to be consistent and to practice their knowledge, and avoid fitna and controversy, and being a source of fitna. And we ask Allah the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. Anything I said was correct from Allah Azza wa Jal. Anything I said that was incorrect from myself and the shaitan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.